Today, if one asked any New Orleanian familiar with the local Jewish history what important events occurred within the orphanage at the dawn of the 20th century, he would most likely point to the creation of the Newman School as the only defining moment. In truth, there was so much more, and all of it seemed focused on recognizing each child within the home as an individual with different needs and aspirations. Within a few years of Newman School opening its doors, the home itself abolished its own traditional uniforms. Superintendent Chester Teller declared the home the Golden City, a term that was used to deflect the stigma that an institutionalized child might feel. Gradually, the home began to model citizenship ideals to the younger residents through the creation of small artificial family units headed by big brothers and big sisters. It was also during this period that records began to reveal the success of young men who had lived in the home and left to make their name in trades and commerce. In 1905, the Jewish Historical Society of Louisiana published a large book entitled The History of the Jews of Louisiana. The 220-page book was primarily a who's who of the nearly 200 most distinguished Jews of Louisiana at the dawn of the 20th century. Among the Adlers, Gottschalks, and the Newmans, who comprised a burgeoning German Jewish aristocracy, was a photo of an informally dressed man named Mr. Lazar Schwartz. Listed in the records of the Jewish Orphans Home as resident number 12, Mr. Schwartz was born in Woodville, Mississippi, and entered the home when it opened in 1856 at age 3 with his mother and 4 siblings. The biography proudly introduced Mr. Schwartz as having risen from poor orphan boy status to become a successful dry goods merchant, a former president of Gates of Prayer Congregation in New Orleans, a Knight of Pythias, and a member of the board of directors of both Touro Infirmary and the Orphans Home. Another one of these success stories was Edgar Goldberg. Young Edgar was a native of Delta, Louisiana, and the son of European immigrants. In 1884, he was orphaned at the age of 8. He lived in the Jewish Orphans Home for 6 years until he was 14. In 1890, his aunt and uncle retrieved him, and he worked briefly as a jeweler's apprentice in Jackson, Mississippi. By his early 20s, he had worked for The Spectator, an early Jewish newspaper in Memphis, and a printing company in St. Louis. In 1907, he lived in Houston and began the first Jewish newspaper in Texas named the Jewish Herald. He often remembered the home in the Herald. He encouraged his readers to contribute to the home, and in the paper's first year, he dedicated the front page for 6 weeks in a row to detailing its long history. In 1927, Goldberg declared in the Herald, "In the 72 years of the Jewish Children's Home's existence, not a single boy or girl leaving there has gone astray, or cast odium on the heart which the Jews of New Orleans and the Southland have maintained." Goldberg ran his newspaper successfully for nearly 30 years until his death in 1937. Goldberg's Herald was then sold by his widow to rival David White, who created and operated Houston's Jewish Herald Voice newspaper for another 36 years. In 1973, that company was sold to Joe and Jean Samuels, who expanded the paper and today operate it with the active participation of their children and grandchildren. Ironically, Joe Samuels, now age 89, was also reared for most of his childhood in the former Jewish Children's Home, along with his brother Pat and sister Grace.